Hey everyone, welcome back to another exciting live stream. Before we dive in, I want to give a huge shout out and thanks to the very first official sponsor of my channel, Merlin. Merlin changed the game for how I manage my crypto portfolio, so this exclusive partnership makes a whole lot of sense. Merlin offers advanced tools for wealth preservation, including exit strategies. Their platform is plugged into the world's leading exchanges, so you can get one clear snapshot of your crypto holdings. And I personally use Merlin to optimize my exit strategy to maximize my returns. Merlin empowers me to make informed decisions and plan effectively for both bull and bear markets. Links to Merlin are in the description below. Big thanks to the team for their support. And thank you all for tuning in today. Let's jump into the discussion and explore the latest trends and insights in the world of blockchain. Head on a swivel, ladies and gentlemen.
3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Live stream number 2 here in Cape Canaveral, Florida, in honor of Quantum Summit. I've got to my left some awesome individuals. I'm proud to be sitting next to Molly Elmore, Chief Marketing Officer of Val Hill, and we've got Jimmy Valley, the one and only managing or founder and managing director of Val Hill as well. Guys, how you doing today?
Great.
Doing great.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Oh man, we've got Jimmy Valley on the microphone.
I'm his assistant engineer.
You're doing great, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
I hope you accept my the pizza as a retribution and
We'll work for pizza.
yeah. Excellent. Well, Jimmy, I'm just going to start with you, sir. You know, you're an instrumental individual in the merger and acquisitions.
It's kind of you to say. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're a decorated attorney. What do you foresee for the blockchain space once clarity is provided and who do you think is going to be doing all the buying up of or providing liquidity?
That's a good question. So I think we are going to see a lot of consolidation. It's really already happening. Like Ripple's already acquired Medico. Jack McDonald was just on stage talking about how standard custody, they're finishing their, I guess, Ripple's acquisition of standard custody. He's going to become a Ripple executive now. So Ripple obviously is the 800-pound gorilla in the space, and they're going to be strategically acquiring a lot of businesses. And then you're going to see the other, I think, traditional financial players, your Goldmans, your JP Morgans, and people like the JP Morgan's already been very active. I mean, they made a big play for Consensus and own about 40% of it, I think. And then you're going to see kind of the middle market develop, which is super exciting for a guy like me, because that's kind of where Val Hill will be playing, I think, a lot in the space is, you know, identifying all the different talented companies out there that are cash flowing or starting to get some progress and putting them together. It's because, you know, most of the larger people that already have capital in the traditional space, they don't know blockchain and they would rather just acquire it and fold it in than actually go and try to build it themselves.
Before we switch to you, Molly, and on the topic of Val Hill, curious, what is piquing the interest for Val Hill? I know you're working on a few things from Val Hill Advisors, Val Hill Capital, Val Hill Labs.
Yeah.
Let's say Val Hill Labs for the very end of this conversation.
So we've embarked, and as an industry, we've embarked on a generational tokenization project. You know, every asset, in order to run on truly digital rails, you know, truly something that prevents the double spend issue from happening, you've got to be on blockchain, which means you've got to be tokenized. So, you know, when Larry Fink sits there with CNBC and on Bloomberg and all these financial programs, and he says every financial instrument will be tokenized, that's a necessary thing to happen. So you start to think about all the different categories of even just securities, but financial instruments in the capital markets. There's just a massive amount of existing securities that have to be tokenized. And that'll be a decades-long project. It's like a giant wave of opportunity and services for people who are technically minded, people who know the space to really provide service to people and really have a great business, I think.
Awesome. Exciting times.
It's not so unusual because we saw the exact same process with business into the internet. You know, back in the late 90s, it was very daunting that all these businesses would have to use websites and, you know, email and other forms of electronic communication. And it took about 20 years. And now you can't even imagine trying to run a business without using a ton of web-based services. So the blockchain, I think, and tokenization will play a similar role, that It's all just going to kind of migrate to these new systems. And in 20 years, we're not going to think about it.
In order for this a market to emerge, or how it has emerged, it's come through the private sector. Obviously. Now, what do you think? And because of that, retail has been out in front of these institutional investors, or these just a class of individuals. And because of that, what do you think is going to happen to potential either early OG retail investors, or those that have been participating in this ecosystem for quite some time? Let's just say sub a penny.
I mean, it's similar to the internet as well. If you got lucky and bought Amazon, and you bought other stocks at eBay that kind of had longevity, you were probably a wise investor. But back in the day, like AOL was a great brand, and people made a lot of money off of it. But you see that technology companies go through cycles, and it's very difficult, I think, for the same companies to be around for a long time. So back to the crypto space, if you were an OG early investor on a retail side, there was a gamble that you were betting on the right horse, and that this blockchain doesn't really always matter if the technology is great. It matters, are enough people using it that the network has value. And there's only so many networks that the world needs, that it becomes a race for adoption.
Do you have anything to add, Jimmy?
I do. I think this, the conversation of kind of cryptocurrencies and thinking about them like a stock, like I got in sub a penny, and this one cryptocurrency is going to be, worth $1,000 or whatever, is pretty much on its last legs. I don't think we're going to be talking about that. I think we're going to be talking about use cases and how do we use the technology to take a certain type of asset class and put it on chain. And it'll be those tokens that are really that hold the value, that end up moving across these layer ones, that up until this point, we've been very focused on kind of the underlying protocols and these layer one technologies. I think even 2 years from now, that's going to be a very old and boring conversation.
We've heard Brad Garlinghouse and others, Jack McDonald on stage talk about things like custody, lending, and other functions that are going to be key, let's just say offerings or utility functions within this domain called blockchain. What do you think is going to, referring back to even Val Hill, what do you think is going to be one of the leading functions? And if it's anything like custody, who do you think is going to be out in front within this sector? And do you have aspirations to even partner with entities like that in the ecosystem?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Like, who's going to be, what are the use cases?
So understanding, drawing back to why I brought this question up is I've heard Brad Garlinghouse mention on stage that, lending and a custody are going to be solutions that are, offered within this ecosystem for those that might want to use their assets, or those that want to custody it with institutional investors when these regulations come about. What do you think, or who do you think is going to be a leader in that domain of services within this ecosystem called cryptocurrency or blockchain?
That's a great question. I think there's still a battle over who's going to dominate that. I mean, one of the big differences in this new world of money is that assets are now money, where before debt was money. So there's going to be this whole new world that's going to seem unfamiliar at first, that you have all these assets that need to be somehow securely stored and inventoried. Like if you tokenize gold, for example, or tokenize, art or some type of physical thing that needs to be moved around and stored in a vault, then you have to connect that to the token. So this whole kind of complex connection of the real world asset to the digital asset that we're going to have to get used to and figure out, how do you talk about it? How do you, who custodies, does the same, entity kind of use both, custody both of those? I think we're just so early still that, 99% of the world doesn't even know like what a digital asset is or how they're custodied. So I think we're going to see a first wave of the players. And then as the industry matures, we'll see that more polished seasoned second wave. And I'm just basing that on the fact that the internet went through that. A lot of the very early companies didn't really survive. And now there's kind of a second wave.
I mean, we're already seeing, Citibank.
I mean, Facebook wasn't around in the beginning of the internet. Yeah. Twitter wasn't even, so.
Interesting.
I agree with Molly. It's kind of too early to tell who's, we obviously believe that Ripple's going to do very, very well. And all the names that we know because of like, Link 2 and stuff like that. So Uphold, Standard Custody, Link 2, and then there's going to be, there's kind of emerging leaders in each different sector. So you've got like companies, there's a basket of companies that are trying to like focus on tokenizing real estate.
Yeah.
And there's a basket of companies that are trying to do like DeFi and finance stuff. And then you got custody. And in each one of those little markets, I think you are starting to see some companies bubble up and become leaders. But it's real clunky. And part of your question, it kind of gets at the user base as well. Like it's so rare. The people that we're hanging out with this weekend, the people that, like you're hanging out with at XRP Las Vegas and conferences like that, or Consensus where we were last week or week and a half ago, because everybody is in the space, right? And so they're aware of these things. But it's like 1% of the global population is even aware of this stuff. And when you start talking about serving that next 99%, the training that's going to need to go into how someone interfaces with kind of their bank of digital assets and all that stuff is going to be, those are going to be, I think, the second wave companies that and technologies that Molly was referring to that we'll see.
Now, do you think that you mentioned Link 2, you mentioned Standard Custody. I feel like there's a relationship involved amongst these companies. Do you think so? And what would be the common denominator? Is it the XRPL?
A little bit. I think Link 2 did very well, and there's like I Trust Capital that leaned into the digital asset sector and started supporting and promoting companies that were or even digital assets, right? Link 2 not so much on the digital assets. Link 2, if they're watching, they're going to have to crawl over something. They're not really doing tokenized securities yet, right? I know it's a goal of theirs. I know it's on the roadmap. They've basically done traditional paper securities for companies that are in blockchain and other emerging technologies, AI, things like that. But just because they leaned into even at that level, I think they've definitely established themselves as someone that, is well thought of in the market, right? Absolutely. So they're a leader. It's really kind of up to them. Are they going to like dominate this space? They have an opportunity, but there are broker dealers that are emerging in the digital securities sector now that are already licensed by the SEC to broker, digital assets. I think there's 10 of them right now. Texture Capital's one, T0's one, Securities, who just did the thing with BlackRock. So there are firms that are kind of jumping out into the broker dealer world, which is one of these sectors that I'm talking about. That'll be like real estate, where they really have an opportunity to kind of dominate that space if they partner with the right people. One of the big problems, maybe the biggest problem in that sector, is that there isn't deal makers like us creating product to go on platform, to go on chain, actually creating tokenized equity, tokenized bonds, tokenized all this stuff. And a little bit of that's because Wall Street is just now starting to wake up. Like Larry Fink rang the alarm bell in January. Most of them had no clue what was going on. And even we're speaking with some, hedge fund people and people who are managing, and servicing a lot of, mortgage debt and that kind of stuff. They're really just now, they're like 2 months into even hearing about this tokenization thing. So, there's a big learning curve for some of these firms.
On the topic of or do you have
there's going to be just an interesting scramble, because you have a lot of financial services businesses that are very hierarchical, and the senior people are used to things being done a certain way, and they've been done that way for decades. So there's going to be resistance, and this is just my opinion, some fear that they don't know what's going on and they're going to look uneducated and uninformed. So I think there's going to be some ego management with as these large financial institutions have to embrace this new technology. And we saw the same thing with the internet, that sort of the older generation didn't want to deal with it. So the pressure is going to be on the next generation, the younger leaders at these companies, to kind of usher these institutions into the next era.
I have something to add to that.
Please,
actually.
please.
And the other thing, this phenomenon that's happening, I think it happened in the internet as well. The C-suite of some of these firms are starting to be like, oh, we've got to like jump on this, and it has to happen now, which to a public company means 3 days ago. And they're just like, we just got to throw money at it, right? And so you're seeing a lot of firms, and I'm talking about the big public firms now, the institutions really starting to have, in my opinion, some foot faults on how they're starting to execute their digital strategy. You're also seeing, you remember when BlackRock announced the launch of the Bitcoin ETF, you remember Vanguard was like, we're not going to do that. Well, the CEO of Vanguard's now gone, and they took the guy who had basically ran the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF filing, and he's now the new CEO, and now they're getting in the space, and that happened in 3 months. So that's going to be happening over and over and over again.
Now, with this fast-paced environment, and then with you guys being at the helm of this movement, you guys are, I believe,
I like the way you said that.
if you'll talk about, or at least share with the audience, because I know that you guys aspire to do a raise, and I believe, or an issuance of tokenized securities. You guys would be doing something that you just mentioned others are hoping to do or haven't just done so yet. Can you talk about that process, or things you've learned or you aspire to achieve through this process? Let's dumb it down for those in the audience. Break it down, or at least break it down for me.
So Val Hill Labs is a new entity that we created that is addressing a specific problem, and that we have a vision for some very cool use case applications. But we are not software developers, so we would sit around and talk about how cool it would be if these specific problems were solved with this software. We're like, well, we don't know how to build that software. So we realized that we needed to expand the team and bring on, and this was our decision after kind of attempting to maybe hire some third parties to build this for us, is that we would really like to build this incredibly bright technology team that builds our software in-house and gets very, very efficient with each subsequent project. And so we're raising some money to, one, kind of share this opportunity with our Val Hill tribe, supporters who've been incredibly wonderful over the past couple of years, and sort of transfer some of that capital to these newer software development projects that are going to be the next Amazons or the next eBays of this world that embraces the blockchain. And there's some, the frontier is so large and open that the companies that can take an idea and flawlessly execute are going to be in this incredible position to kind of dominate, which is exciting.
Excellent. Something to add, Jimmy?
Yeah, so a lot of people aren't aware that Val Hill underwrote the first NFT as a security back in 2021.
Really?
So we're and then we got engaged by a couple of real estate funds, one out of California and the other, their partner was out of Florida, to do a tokenized equity offering for a project in Italy that they were going to purchase. So we have a lot of experience on deal execution in this sector that most people don't have. And, and whenever you're talking about, bringing a new concept, it's important that you eat your own dog food, right? That's a common thing you hear in startup world for sure. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to eat our own dog food. So the Val Hill Labs offering is going to be what's called a 20% paid in kind convertible preferred. So it will the preferred token that is available for purchase by investors will accrete at a rate of 20% per annum. It'll be paid in kind, so it's just going to grow in value. But then upon what we're going to call a qualifying liquidity event, so call it another big fundraise or some liquidity event for one of the projects that we're building, the investors will either have an opportunity to say, pay me my money that it's accreted to, or I actually want to be part of that. If you're going to take that public or something, I want to roll into that and take my value that's kind of grown and roll into that. So that's what we're selling, but we're also going to be tokenizing the entire equity capital structure of the firm. So there's going to also be a couple of classes of common equity. There's going to be a Class A common and a Class B common. Those won't be available for investors. Those will be allocated among management and the partners. But that will also be in tokenized form. So it'll be in a wallet and, that whole thing.
Wow. Well, congratulations on your accomplishments
Thank
in
you.
the first tokenized.
Yeah, so we're working on the legal documents right now. We're doing the whole roadmap that's got to match up. That's what Molly spent a ton of time on, is like matching up the roadmap to be a very simple walkthrough process for investors. This has to be done in a obviously compliant with securities laws, because these are securities. So we're doing a 506C, Rule 506C offering, which means all the investors will have to be accredited, unfortunately, but that's the world we're living in. But we're going to have a very seamless process to kind of, verify the accreditation. And here I think we'll launch probably, Molly would say 2 weeks. I'm going to say 2.5 to 3 weeks. We'll launch.
This summer, even probably end of June, early July. And it's going to be exciting for some of our investors. It's going to be the first time they've ever bought digital assets and bought private equity. And it's going to be a kind of a neat process for them to go through the first time.
How exciting and a convergence of the market, or these markets. You're blending the technology with, and putting it to its true use cases, which is great. Shifting gears here, I want to talk about some things that we hear regularly in the XRP community, at least. Back in their 1913s, the Federal Reserve Act was essentially launched. This activated, and also it was launched at midnight on Christmas Day, while basically everyone's either asleep or opening up their Christmas gifts, not giving two hoots about what's going on in the world of finance or things of that nature. So a really peculiar time why someone would, or especially a government agency or the Fed, would develop and launch something like at this scale at that type of time of day or time of year. Regardless, that's might be a conversation within itself. But the Federal Reserve Act gave birth to the Federal Reserve System. It also gave birth to the central banking system that we know today. Now, I want to know, because we've heard many times
Something else it gave birth to. Income taxes.
That's very true. Yeah. That very painful, especially being a resident of California. Yep. But we've heard, especially in the XRP community, and from those that worked at Ripple, even at Link2, and now I believe at Forte Games. I'm speaking about Miguel Villas. He was the, I think he ran XRPL markets for Ripple, one of the first early employees. But there was times where he mentioned, which is a functionality of the central bank as being a lender of last resort. Now, and he mentioned many times that Ripple has the potential to become that entity or play that role in this global financial system. What do you think it would take for an entity like Ripple to be in that type of position and have that type of power? What would it take?
Well, there's a logistical question of they must have some kind of asset to lend, right? And if they have a large amount of XRP, and should there be a major markets crash, including a collapse of the fiat money system, the fiat dollar, there's sort of a widely discussed theory. We often talk about this, that kind of out of the ashes, they will reprice or revalue XRP and potentially revalue gold at the same time, and then use these new assets to back new sovereign currencies that are issued on the blockchain. And then Ripple could function in a central bank, and that, the lender of last resort thing is a slippery slope, because are you kind of preparing for a whole lot of bad loans? Like, are we preparing for this type of somewhat reckless behavior? We saw that in 2009, a lot of banks made very, brazen gambles. They lost. There was no consequences for them. The lender of last resort just printed a bunch of money, and that created a lot of inflation for us. So I think it would be worth examining, like, do we really need a lender of last resort? I used to make infographics and went into the Federal Reserve history quite a bit. And there was a panic that preceded, the formation of the Federal Reserve. And it's widely speculated that that was kind of orchestrated to kind of create the justification for JP Morgan needing to be that lender of last resort. And it didn't end up serving the interests of people like us to have this private third party, be controlling monetary policy for, in this case, the whole world, let alone the United States. So to answer your question, yes, Ripple could be lender of last resort, but I think before we get into that, we should decide, do we really need one? Is this something that is healthy to have this very large financial system that gives a lot of power to this one group?
Do you think that, would you be scared in the world, like in that type of world?
I'm a fan of less government and lots of independent entities that potentially all have their own banking system. So if one sucks and fails and is not run poorly, there's a whole lot of other options. When you have all of this centralization and this focus, in our case, on the dollar system being kind of the currency of the world, you give a lot of power to the people who have control over that currency. And so I'd rather move away from central banking and have a lot of, maybe each state has their own central bank. We all start farming our own sovereign entities, and they have their own their own banking institution. So we don't have to put all this power in like one company, one organization having this type of power globally. Power can corrupt, and it gets so tempting to just push that envelope. And now if you can print money, then you can bribe people and pay people off. You call it lobbying or whatever. But I think to get rid of a lot of that cancer that's infected our financial system, having less centralization and many smaller entities, I think can create some checks and balances.
Yeah, I think we call that type of entity, or back to your comment, was SBF, as far as just being able to get away with a lot of nefarious activities. But you mentioned that the pricing of gold or things of that nature, or assets, would need to be significantly readjusted for even potentially, I'm trying to button this conversation or comment with the previous one, where do you think that if indeed there was a role for an entity like Ripple, or many entities sharing similar responsibilities, so that decentralizes that and there's no centralization of all that power, do you think that this would require the banks to purchase up all this gold, and have all these assets on their balance sheets to provide, or have that collateral to provide value behind it?
Yeah. They've been buying gold for decades. They have to report what they've been buying. So central banks around the world have been stockpiling gold. And at the same time, they've said, gold is this relic. We don't need to worry about it. But then they also, had the BIS classify gold as a tier 1 asset several years ago. So there's been some contradictory information. But, one of the great things about the XRP community is that there are some, very diligent researchers who read a lot of the banking documents and what the World Bank and the IMF put out. And they've made it very clear that gold is a valued asset. That's why they labeled it a tier 1 asset, which basically means it's money. And so it's a great play. Keep the price of gold low. Let's stockpile. When we have to switch to a new money system, then we can revalue it. And our gold that was worth, $1 one day is now worth $100 the next day.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, a country or a central bank or whatever that looks insolvent, they're miraculously in the money because they've just revalued what their assets are worth. And that could be a solution to a global liquidity crisis, is just take assets that don't have a ton of value in dollars at this time and kind of reprice them in some other currency and solve the problem. Yeah, I had the wonderful opportunity to interview Jason Cousins, the founder of Glint in XRP Las Vegas. And he brought up the fact that, because he's doing some work here in the States, I believe the state of Texas, where the state of Texas has basically identified that gold and silver are a currency. Yeah. And so do you think that's just the tip of the iceberg? Do you think more states are going to follow suit? Well, I think he actually mentioned there might even be a dozen of them that are already leaning into the same pathway that Texas is already taking shape.
Yeah, so it's at least in the 20s numbers of states, and I've heard that it's in the 40s. I haven't researched it and put a spreadsheet to figure out.
That's basically the entire U.S.
Yeah, the way they've started is they're saying that transactions in gold or silver are non-taxable. Texas had a bill that came out probably 3 years ago that they wanted to do a gold-backed digital currency. Texas also repatriated all of its gold from New York to a bullion facility, basically our own Fort Knox. I'm from Texas, so that's why I kind of up on this stuff.
Where's your cowboy boots?
Yeah, you'll see it tomorrow. I did bring them. I'm, this is my favorite rabbit hole to talk about, central banking and the return to gold standards, sound money standards of, and I'm a believer that this, I mean, we're in the later innings of this happening. And so, you've had the BRICS nations substantially increase. They're being very clear that they're going back to a sound money standard. We've got the 50-year petrodollar deal is expiring, I think, on Sunday. So June 9th, and that's been in place for 50 years. Once the dollar doesn't have, we already didn't have gold backing it since I was a baby, 71. Once, it is not required that oil is sold globally in dollars, there really is nothing backing the dollar anymore, other than our sweat, labor, kind of our taxes.
That's another rabbit hole.
Yeah. So, you're going to have to figure out a way to stabilize the system. I think, ironically, you had the last administration with an anthem of America first, and I believe they wanted that. I believe that was their policy, but I think it's kind of going to be America last. And largely because of the things that occurred in the last election and the administration that we've been living with since then, have really, in my opinion, been a disaster as far as anything monetary policy or almost any type of even human rights, any political policies that they've attempted to implement have been very, very bad. So right now, I think the other countries of the world are kind of being given an opportunity to get ahead. And I also think they're being given an opportunity to get ahead in digital as well. Like the digital regulations in Europe and the digital regulations in the Middle East are way far ahead of where we are in the United States. And so I kind of picture it as like this knife is dropping, right? And you don't want to try to catch it. But at some point we will be required, and I bet it probably ends up happening towards the end of this year, or if there's an inauguration sometime first of next year, that we also return to a sound money standard. And that'll be what stabilizes the dollar. Because I think we have the gold. And the other thing that's happened, you saw maybe you saw the Supreme Court just came out and basically said they affirmed something that's in our Constitution. Yeah. So I think a lot of people aren't aware that basically coining money is prohibited by the states unless you use gold or silver. And then that's permitted in the Constitution. And so you've got these states that are starting to kind of propose rolling back to the gold standard. We also have federal legislation. I think it's Mooney, Representative Mooney, who's proposed returning back the dollar back to the gold standard. But I don't know. It's kind of cool. You're almost seeing states, I think about Trump sitting up at the inauguration in 2017 saying we're returning power to you, the people. And how do you implement something like that? Well, you got to basically, you got to have the states become powerful again, more powerful, or at least on par with the federal government. And a way to do that is to have their own monetary system that's a sound money system.
Interesting. That is very interesting. You mentioned that, as we move to this sound money system, move to this tokenized world, banks are already leaning into tokenizing gold and things of that nature. I want to say I've read that HSBC has already leaned in, and they're a leading Hong Kong commercial bank, and they've already issued the first retail facing, I want to say gold back token in Hong Kong. Do you think, in kind of going back to your comment that yes, the US is a laggard, but we're one of the, if not the biggest market in the world. And so it's going to take a little bit more to shake the tree maybe.
We're a large market in the capital markets.
Yes.
We don't make anything though.
That's true.
We used to be a major manufacturing market. Like that's when during World War II, we had all this manufacturing capacity. You had the Rust Belt, you had these amazing cities like Detroit and Cleveland that were like these super powerful economic cities because they had so many people working and producing all these amazing things, right? That's not America anymore. America offshored almost all of its capacity like that. So, you know, and that's why you've got, you know, people that, you know, our jobs are very service oriented jobs now, right? They're not the types of things that really built up the middle class in America. It would be nice, in my opinion, to return manufacturing and producing real goods in America and actually having that, you know, really constitution of an economy, because we import everything, right? China makes almost all of our stuff, makes all of our medicines. Look at all the crazy stuff that's happened around that for the past 4 years, right? So
and that was the consequence of the Triffin dilemma, that when you want to be the issuer of the world reserve currency, your stuff is really expensive. So if you're manufacturing stuff, you got to compete with markets that can produce that stuff less expensively. And it just priced the US out of a lot of markets. And so pushed to these service jobs and these kind of management jobs. But if we're shifting away from kind of this sketchy money system to one that's based on actual assets, the nations that naturally produce those assets, whether those are like commodities or oil or gold or silver or lithium, they're going to have a lot more kind of money or wealth relative to what was experienced in the old world system. So I think there's going to be this shift. And back to this point you mentioned about the U.S. being held back and being behind and laggard. You know, we regularly see there's discussion and frustration about the lack of regulations in the United States. There is a very logical, possible theory that that is being done intentionally to give the other nations of the world the opportunity to kind of get their stuff together before the U.S. enters the market. I mean, the U.S. is such a strong player in the technology space, and we have this culture of entrepreneurship and innovation. At the minute American companies step into any market, they tend to dominate. It's kind of like golf, right? Like if you're the pro and you go and play with a bunch of people who aren't that good, sometimes you give them a handicap to let them catch up. And so by holding back the US and letting these other, that's why, like, you look at Stellar, they're doing all this stuff in like Latin America and Africa. They're kind of helping build the infrastructure and hiring teams and educating people about how these technologies work, so that when the US does enter the market, the other nations of the world can compete. And this is what I believe is the level playing field that Trump has spoken about, and that not always having the dollar be the dominant and the US markets dominate everything, because it creates this resentment that it's very hard to compete with the United States. And so if we kind of make an effort to enable that, we might have more world peace, which would be lovely.
Yeah.
just want to comment that I've got the smartest partner in blockchain. And she's absolutely right. Chris Larson said, I don't know, 4 years ago, that Silicon Valley had already dominated blockchain.
Yeah.
And so I think her theory has a lot of credibility to it, that you needed to give the rest. Because if we just would have said game on at that point, I mean, we've already dominated the internet. If we would have dominated the internet, if we would have just gone from a standing start at that point in time, then we probably would have pushed the rest of the world out of this technology. And therefore, what's the incentive for them to join it, right?
We've heard also Brad Garlinghouse mention many times that, well, I've heard him at least mention that if he could start all over, he would have started Ripple outside of the US, or he recommends via mentorship or whatever. Let's just say if he's giving mentorship to up and coming entrepreneurs, he recommends, start these entities outside of the US. Do you think to that point of, does that improve the handicap for then these third world or these jurisdictions outside the US by us basically giving them our best talent?
Well, I mean, look at Dubai. Dubai is, exploding as this kind of center of blockchain technology, and, African, European businesses are all going there to kind of discuss this stuff. It kind of gives the other nations of the world just an opportunity to be leaders in the space. And if the US had just dominated from day one and it was like Wall Street 2.0, I think there would have been a lot of cynicism in the other nations of the world that it's just the new dollar system in a different outfit, but it's going to have the same kind of inherent system that tries to push the third world and keep them. It's a caste system. Like the old money system benefited a very small percentage at the top, and the rest of the world, particularly producers of assets, were colonies, and colonies are exploited. And the dollar system enabled this colony structure. And I think the colonies of the world, this is what the BRICS nations are. They're former European colonies that make a lot of stuff and are kind of tired of that stuff being taken at a very low value rate. And they're like, enough. We're just not going to participate in the dollar system anymore. It'll be ironic, and we've discussed this, if the last nation to join BRICS is the United States. And eventually it will be a global network of all the countries, including the US, where it's kind of like the states. Like you have 50 states. No state is supposed to be more powerful than another one. And if you had a BRICS alliance where each country had its own kind of equal shot in the financial system, it would be more fair. And I'm an advocate of a fair system. I love the United States, but I don't think we should always dominate every market if the game is rigged. Like, let's have a fair game, and then let's see who wins.
I know you guys I'm taking a little bit more time than we anticipated, so I do want to close out this this live stream, one with giving a highlight to the sponsor of the event. It is Merlin. Before we give a shout out to Merlin, I do want to touch on one thing before I lose this train of thought. Brad Garlinghouse has also mentioned that this crypto world is soon going to, and similar to the internet trends, where there is a collapse. A crypto bubble is potentially on the horizon. What do you think would be a potential catalyst for such an event? And what do you think new investors that are coming into the market should be mindful of, given the circumstance, if and when there is a crypto bubble burst?
Yeah.
I think meme coins are in trouble. Yeah, if you have a project or a token that doesn't actually do anything, that it's got a cute little mascot or something like that, and you pumped it to the moon because the supply and demand type dynamics at this moment in time, that's not where you want to be when the chickens come home to roost. It's already happening. The event that will cause those to go to zero, there is a dramatic lack of liquidity in the capital markets just generally. I mean, look at what's happening with this GameStop, short hedge phenomenon right now. It almost took down the entire stock market, right? Berkshire Hathaway flash crash to like zero. I mean, there's all this crazy circuit breaker stuff going on. That is those are symptoms of lack of liquidity in the markets generally. Okay. So the people who ultimately, the people who are in these non-utility tokens or tokens that don't have a use case, they're going to have to burp them up just to pay their bills and, satisfy their debts. Going to happen. And the way, we talk a lot about the virtuous cycle and the opposite of that's the death spiral. We personally believe that we're deep into the death spiral right now. You see this happen more acutely with single companies, like when Enron went under or whatever. So what ends up happening when a company enters the zone of insolvency, it starts to trigger kind of bombs in their foundation, kind of all the way down. And the more it falls, the more bombs that are triggered. So it's very much like you enter into this spiral and it gets faster and faster, and the gravity is more and more intense. It's harder to get out. So we kind of think that the fiat dollar system, I say we, Jimmy thinks the fiat dollar system, I don't want to speak for Molly. Jimmy thinks the fiat dollar system is very much on its last legs and is in kind of a death spiral type thing. 63 banks, I think, just failed like yesterday, something like that. It's so, that's only going to increase until we have this, return to sound money, and that's what will stabilize it.
Yeah, we got a comment.
I would agree with you.
A comment from
she agreed.
Why is that a surprise?
She doesn't always agree.
We're often in heated agreement.
Yeah, sometimes we're in heated agreement, which means we're arguing about the same point.
Thing, right?
Oh, amazing. Yeah, we have a comment from Lawrence Miller. Thanks for tuning in, Lawrence. Appreciate you, man. The problem is we've given the government too much power to commit their criminal, corrupt theft and control.
But the irony is, I don't remember giving anyone that power. Like, I don't really know that I gave it.
Yeah.
Maybe I was tricked into consenting, but I don't agree to that.
Did you sign a 1040? That's one of the places it happens. Look, we've been apathetic, right? We've been apathetic for a long time. It's been really good in this country for a long time. And that's kind of why, we're in the final innings of this whole thing, is because it's not great for a lot of people in America. But when you have the world reserve currency, right, and you can use this very, very powerful, piece of paper to acquire things and have fancy cars and homes and all this stuff, and it costs you 0.01 or whatever to borrow money to buy houses and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was really great for a long time. We're kind of waking up with the effects of the hangover at this point. But we kind of deserve to go through a little pain.
Yeah. Another question coming in from the audience here is from Kelly Niles, who actually got a Korean barbecue with him and
saw those pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for tuning in, Kelly. Will we get accountability for ETHgate? What are the damages due to the XRP community from the SEC?
Well, apparently we're going to have Halloween costumes with Hinman's that'll be, orange jumpsuits with Hinman's name on them. So, I've been living with this ETHgate thing for 3 years now. Because when I figured it out, it was, early 21, and I knew it was going to take a really long time for this stuff to bubble up. I've gotten to a place in my heart where I kind of just want to forgive them. I think other people will. I think they will have consequences. And I think we're starting to see it. Empower's going at them really, really hard. They filed it wasn't Empower, right? It was CPAC basically filed complaints with the California Bar Association and the New York Bar Association against Bill Hinman, and they name, Andreessen Horowitz in that. So the glitter bombs, yeah, correct. Where he's, I think, head of regulatory affairs, right? It was when he went through the revolving door, that's where he ended up. So it's kind of blowing up. The glitter bomb is kind of blowing up. It's like hitting all these people. The irony of Chris Dixon at Consensus last week talking about like how the regulations are so far behind and all this stuff's like, oh my God. I think
any takeaways, significant takeaways from Consensus that you were surprised or
a couple of takeaways. One, Molly and I were there last year, and it was a very Ethereum dominated thing. In fact, I don't even recall. I know Ripple had like a booth. David Schwartz had like a developer kind of thing there, but
we had a dinner, and it was an XRP related dinner, and we were like kind of worried we would be sort of shunned because it was such an, Ripple was still maligned at that time because of the lawsuit.
That has 180. This almost felt like an XRP conference.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
And a lot of the projects there.
The conference room chairs had XRP L on the back.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
they had a huge area with kind of all, like Zonix and Palisades, and a lot of the companies that are working on the XRPL were there, very prominently featured. That was number one. Number two, there is this vibe that I did not pick up on last year that we've broken through, and it's kind of game on. It's like the business community and the developers are kind of starting to see eye to eye about the things they want to bring about. Obviously, real world asset tokenization was like the topic, the buzz phrase. So it was exciting. It was palpably exciting that we're kind of breaking through, and the days ahead are pretty good.
Yeah, I saw a brief interview from David Schwartz and I believe King Solomon, where David was mentioning that, King Solomon asked, "What do you think low hanging is going to be which asset is going to be tokenized first, or what that basically in a nutshell?" And David was like, "Easy, securities. I mean, what's so hard to think of?" I think a lot of people think that there's a lot to unpack there, but I mean, we're talking about just instant settlement and tokenizing this archaic assets that are, because of the framework which they have to to navigate, or that we as market participants have to navigate, then we're exposed to this slow and clunky, arduous process, or you got to wait for the money to transfer through the maybe like a service like Carta, and it's got to get there's just what we're used to is being able to send value to another third party in 3 seconds. The transaction settles and we're done. And I imagine that's probably going to be the biggest game changer, such as like a T0 in a landscape that's takes 1 to 2 days to settle.
The other thing that you won't be able to do in a blockchain capital markets, blockchain securities environment is naked short selling. You'll actually have to borrow the token and pay. And so you'll have to have it covered. And Wall Street has stolen over $100 trillion from Main Street in the past 30 years just by naked short selling. That's what this whole thing is going. That's this whole GameStop thing. That's what it is. And when you do this naked short selling, you're actually creating phantom securities. They call them synthetic securities, right? So they're basically borrowing, but they're not really borrowing. They're just doing the sell short side of it, and they don't have the share, in their back pocket to be able to cover it. That's what's going to happen if Roaring Kitty, which is like the greatest freaking story in America right now. If people aren't, there's two things. People need to see Dumb Money on Netflix, right? Dumb Money, which will provide you all the background that happened kind of up into 21 about what happened. And then the guy disappears and shows up, 2 weeks ago, like disclosing his position and all this stuff. And then he might be the most adept trader in the history of capital markets trading, because he basically has had this live stream today when the stock went down 60%. And I mean, what better fact do you want if anyone tries to prosecute you for manipulating the market? It's like, what are you talking about? When I did my big show of how long I was, it went down 60%. Clearly, I'm not in control of the market. So David Schwartz is, back to your point, David Schwartz is absolutely right. The capital markets are super easy. The securities, super easy to, it's obvious. It's so obvious. I can't believe Wall Street's so behind. The next major category is real estate.
Who do you think is going to be the player? Molly, please jump in. Who do you think is going to be one of the biggest players to dip their toe into DLT or into crypto, into this tokenized world?
I think it's going to be niche oriented. You'll have like the dominant players in the real estate world, the dominant players in maybe the derivatives market, the dominant players in, bonds, because working out the nuances of how those markets need to work efficiently. I guess I moved my hands and made the camera move.
Oh, do we?
Sorry. So I don't know if we'll have, actually, I don't really want there to be only a couple of companies that dominate, blockchain technology. We want to have many companies that are experts in their field so that there's competition and they can't, manipulate markets or gain too much government, favoritism. One thing that I've learned through this kind of crypto blockchain digital asset journey is that the banking cartel has a lot of power. There's a small group of banks that seem to potentially own all of the banks and control those markets. And they don't serve our interests, where if there was not a monopoly and there was more of an actual free market, then I think we would see better products for people like us. We'd see more efficiency. And that's one of the beautiful things about DLT and blockchain technology is that it can remove the middleman. So you don't really need to have this many of these central players being the clearinghouse for things, because you can have these smaller markets that just connect peer to peer.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Would you have anything to add, Jim?
Well, BlackRock's already there, right? So they've already said, we're in, we're playing.
How long do
They're
you think they've
the
been in the
world's
market?
largest, a long time.
Yeah.
Long time. Yeah, Robbie Mission's been there a while. And it'll probably, I guess it's kind of happening like we're coming up from the bottom, right? And they're kind of coming down this way. We certainly hope Val Hill can pick a few crumbs off the wealth table that they're generating all this value. I eventually you're going to see the Goldmans and the JP Morgans and firms like that. They have access to a ton of wicked smart people. They have the asset base to be able to pay well and incentivize people. They'll have to play the game differently. Blockchain is going to force them to play a more kind of straight, compliant type thing. They won't be able to do a lot of the things that, say, JP Morgan in particular has been involved in. I'm talking about your human trafficking, drugs, backing cartels, all this stuff is they've paid fines on this stuff. I mean, it's public knowledge, right? The blockchain is going to stop a lot of that kind of black market, at least using the financial rails to do that.
Yeah.
But you're going to see, I mean, they're certainly going to be there. Big private equity. I think your KKRs of the world, your Blackstones, people like that, who I don't really think of. I don't think of them as asset managers as much as like deal generators and product makers. I think they're gonna wake up and get involved. They're gonna start hiring firms like ours and getting making a play in the space, and it's going to get real exciting. And this isn't that far off. I think 18 months from now we're going to be mind blown at how everybody who's even around here is going to be very busy doing really cool stuff. Is what I predict.
I think we're already very busy doing really cool
busy.
stuff.
And doing
It's
cool
just
stuff.
going to look very different than it does now.
Also being compensated.
Yeah.
Put
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I do actually on that topic. I want to give a shout out to our sponsor of this.
There you go, Merlin.
Of this live stream,
What a setup.
Merlin. Yes, thank you. Thank you to the fabulous team at the head of Merlin, Coach JV, Johnny, Abs. They've developed a wonderful, I want to say, a super app that includes features that enable individuals like me that dabble into crypto to be able to set price targets and to improve your exit strategy and preserve your wealth. And that's just some of the features that Merlin offers. They also offer some really interesting a suite of services that you can use and print out CSV files and upload for tax purposes. So anyways, give a check in the description of this video below for the link to Merlin's application. And again, thank you guys for sponsoring. This is the first official sponsor of my channel.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So thank you again.
And congratulations to you and your new channel and everything. We love you. We love your family. And really glad that things are blossoming so well.
Yeah, you know what? It's been the universe or God has been very good. Like I've been talking to others in the space, that it's just people said call it goodwill, but I busted my behind for a few years, and thankfully the community has recognized that and has been able to help me on this journey and given me some great guidance and mentorship, and I'm really thankful for it, and thankful to have you guys as mentors and the people that I look up to in the space. So thank you very much. Before we go, guys, because I know that we're out here in Cape Canaveral, maybe there's a rocket being shot off, maybe there's a reggae conference to go to. What do you maybe both? What do you guys? Is there anything that we haven't discussed yet? I know that you guys are also well known for pricing models for XRP and things of that nature. We haven't talked about that. I don't know if you guys just have discussed those as of late. Anything there, or?
I guess we kind of saw that as a project that was very interesting to us. We had nobody had ever done anything like that before, built like these independent models that were all consolidated in one report with sort of a summary analysis. And we were very proud of that work and the reception that we got and the distribution, the reach of the sort of the tweet and the book, for example. And I think we actually when we were done, we kind of moved on to our next thing. So like, we don't sit around talking about the price of XRP at all, ever. Like,
well, the reason why
a year ago, actually,
right?
The reason why you bring it up,
I think it was yesterday.
Yes, it's our anniversary of the report. Right?
Oh wow! Congratulations. Well, the reason why I bring it up, I mean, you drafted the letter to the federal.
That's old.
Right.
Oh, okay.
It goes back to 21. But yeah.
I mean, these are significant moves.
Yeah. Somebody had to do it, and I think I just had the skills to do it. So
absolutely.
Getting that ball rolling back then definitely set up what became the valuation committee, which was we had 10 on that committee.
About 10. We
about 10
6 models, so some people were just participants. I didn't actually build a model. I just worked on the paper.
Yeah. Very cool.
It was super cool. Before we came on your show, we were out talking about this is all everybody's favorite subject. Talk
Yeah.
about XRP. How's it going to be? What's the escrow going to be used for? All this stuff, right? And it really does take us back. Patrick Riley was out there. We were because he was on the valuation
He'll be
committee.
up next, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, cool.
He's alive, so just for the record.
And, you know,
We have discussed that a few times.
we just had some wicked smart people involved in that who think a lot deeper than your average person on Twitter.
Yeah.
And so I feel really blessed to have been very grateful for everybody's participation in that, and grateful for everybody that looked at, we ended up partnering with Cornell University after that, and tried to have them come up with basically software which could take our work, but then value any digital asset. And, these were master's students. They weren't, undergrad, and they were like, this is hard.
Really hard.
Yeah.
So, that's a neat thing to have on the resume for sure.
And you also, I've obviously follow you across all platforms, and you were recently spoke at, I want to say, your alumni.
So I went to undergrad at Lamar University in Beaumont, and it was great. Ended up hanging out with Don Warren. Don, if you're listening, he's running the accounting program at Lamar. And Don's amazing. He's worked at I think he worked at the FDIC. He's amazing accounting background, super cool guy, wears a bow tie. He's like straight out of central casting for, like accounting. And he's like, we have to have a blockchain program here, like immediately. And they've got some cool young, that was the cool thing for me, like being on campus and seeing like these young people who kind of have this accounting background, but they're also computer science majors too. And you're just like, we're in good hands. Like this new generation is going to emerge, and they're going to be ninjas. It's going to be awesome.
I love to hear that, because I feel like others that think about the educational system is potentially broken and things of that nature. So I love to hear that there's hope for this next generation, especially within the domain of software engineering, things of that nature. And if one of you are listening to me or in the future, and I'm still fun employed, reach out. I'm just kidding. But anyways, guys, is there anything that we haven't discussed before I'll let you go here?
I think we're good. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining today.
All right.
Ollie, it's always a
Yes,
privilege.
always.
Brother,
Jimmy, thank
good
you,
to
sir.
see you.
Always. Can't wait to go to that reggae concert with you later.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.